Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 3, Episode 3, Sunk Cost. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 3, Episode 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So overall, this was a pretty effective episode in moving the story forward. A lot of interesting things happen and play out with the typical high quality that I've come to expect from this show. So let's actually start off with Mike, as even though in the previous episode we saw Gus Fring for the first time, in this episode we finally get to see him being candid and having a conversation with Mike about Hector Salamanca. I personally don't think it was necessary to delay this conversation to episode 3, but you know, that's fine. Once we finally did get this conversation, it was quite amazing. It was interesting that Gus knew absolutely everything about Mike, even that he robbed the Salamanca's truck, and Hector himself doesn't even know that. But again, such a thing is totally in Gus's character. So Gus makes it clear that he's done with Mike and will leave him alone, granted that Mike is done with Hector. However, Mike then states that he isn't done with Hector Salamanca. Then next we see Mike. He's in Mexico receiving a package from a doctor, and if I'm not too mistaken, I think that's the same doctor from Breaking Bad who helped save Gus and Mike after their running with the cartel. So then we see Mike up on a hill, observing two of Salamanca's men who are driving the truck, which we know they used to transport drugs in. Interestingly enough, there are two drivers now. This is no doubt in response to the truck being hijacked by Mike in the first place. So Mike is looking at them through the scope of the rifle, but instead of shooting at them, he fires shots into the air, to which the men dismiss as hunters in the distance. And so they get back into the truck and drive away, and as they do so, Mike shoots at the shoes that he threw up on the power lines earlier, just as the truck drives under it, which spills something all over the truck. And of course the drivers take no heed of the gunshot noise because they think it's just the hunters. It's pretty safe to assume that something, that substance is some sort of illegal substance that Mike had obtained from the doctor. And so when the truck goes through customs at the U.S. border, they find the drugs on the truck and immediately detain the drivers. No doubt they will search the truck even further and find the actual drugs that they were transporting. So it's pretty interesting that this was Mike's next play. Instead of hijacking another truck, he simply arranges to have them arrested at the border. My question is, to what end? When Mike was first talking to Gus, he said he didn't want to hijack any more trucks, but then once he learned that Gus was an adversary of Hector, things seemed to change, and it seems that Mike is in fact teaming up with Gus, which is made clear by the fact that he went to the doctor that works for Gus. And what's further interesting is when the nurse pointed out Mike to the doctor, she said he was here about revenge. So I'm a bit curious to know what Mike's big picture plan is. Surely there's more to it than simply messing with a few more trucks, or maybe there isn't. I don't know. But surely this is going to provoke Hector Salamanca in some way. To do what? I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that this is the beginning of Mike and Gus's working relationship that we know will eventually lead to Mike becoming Gus's right-hand man. So I do think that Gus was impressed by Mike, the way he conducted himself professionally and managed to trace the tracer back to him, which is why I think Gus offered his assistance in his next endeavor. So I'm really curious to see where they go from here. So moving on to the Jimmy storyline, this was also really interesting as we see the fallout from Jimmy's rampage against Chuck last week. It was interesting how Chuck was talking to Jimmy as they were waiting for the cops to show up and arrest him, and Chuck was going on and on about how this will be better for Jimmy in the long run and how he did it out of love and blah 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 blah. Now I think Chuck, at the same time of saying all this nonsense, wasn't just trying to convince Jimmy, but was also trying to convince himself. himself. Chuck wants to believe that he is in the right in doing this for Jimmy's own benefit, when the truth is, while Chuck is not totally in the wrong, after all, Jimmy did commit forgery in order to humiliate him, Chuck's motivations are not as pure as he wants to believe and are based more in jealousy and petty resentment that Chuck has held against Jimmy since childhood. I love Jimmy's response, which was to just very calmly sit there and silently while Chuck went on, until finally just calmly telling him that one day he's going to die alone and no one will be there for him. So throughout their conflict, even though Jimmy hated Chuck and was mad at him, he ultimately stuck by him and still cared for him as a brother. And I think that this is the breaking point in which Jimmy is totally and completely done with Chuck altogether, and I'm still convinced this will elevate even further to the point where Jimmy actively has Chuck committed, but we'll see. So then we get the sequence that again stretched it a bit longer than I'd care for, but in the end it wasn't all that bad and actually quite effective, where Jimmy was arrested and arraigned while he outright refused Kim's help. And then we see his interactions with this prosecutor guy he used to work with in season 1, and again, I really like this guy. I always find him really funny. Anyway, Jimmy tries to cozy up to him and butter him up until realizing that he won't be working on this case, nor will anyone in the Albuquerque office that he knows, as they're too familiar with Jimmy, and so they're bringing in someone from the outside, someone whom the prosecutor guy referred to as tough but fair, which ironically was the same way Jimmy described Tuco in one of the first episodes of season 1. What I found interesting was the scene we got where Jimmy returns from jail and tries to explain to Kim why he rejected her, and that he feels that it's his mess up, that he needs to clean it up, his own screw up, and he doesn't want this affecting Kim's normal workload, which is high enough already. Now, it's hard to read Kim's response as she just says okay. It's obvious that she's still pissed at Jimmy for rejecting her outright like that, but I think she can see his point of view of that they don't want this nonsense to affect their business. But then the big revelation came later on when Kim saw Jimmy smoking outside and went to join him, and Jimmy told her that the prosecution is offering him a deal, something they refer to as a PPD, which Kim took as great news. Now, if I understand it correctly, it means Jimmy has to confess to everything but doesn't get convicted of anything. Instead, faces probation for a year, and as long as he serves out the probation without incident, nothing will happen to him. So Kim thinks this is the best news ever, but Jimmy doesn't seem that excited, and the other shoe drops when Jimmy tells Kim that the PPD was Chuck's idea. That's when Kim realizes that something is up, and so she asks what Chuck's game is here. So Jimmy reveals that part of the deal is that his signed confession to a felony has to be sent to the Bar Association, which would result in Jimmy losing his license and no longer being able to practice law. Now, this to me was the least surprising thing in the world. In fact, this was exactly what I was expecting, as I knew Chuck's main beef with Jimmy was trying to prevent him from being a lawyer. I knew Chuck wasn't as concerned with Jimmy going to jail. In fact, I was a bit surprised that Jimmy himself didn't realize this. I suppose he was a bit blinded by rage. But when they showed the scene of Chuck meeting with that prosecutor and Chuck suggested that maybe there was another solution, I was just waiting for him to say something to the effect of, oh, just strip away his law license. So when we got to the following scene where it was revealed that was Chuck's big play, I wasn't the least bit surprised. So Jimmy and Kim decide to fight this, and Kim convinces Jimmy to let her help, which is a very wise of him and very generous of Kim. So Jimmy's original plan was to plead down to a misdemeanor, but the prosecutor made it clear that she wasn't going to go for that, so we know that wouldn't have worked anyway. So it seems his goal now is to avoid the felony charge, because if he's charged with the misdemeanor, that may result in a suspension, but it wouldn't result in him losing his law license altogether, which is what would happen if he gets charged with a felony. And by refusing the deal, Jimmy is risking that he may lose his license anyway and get jail time on top of that, so it is a big risk. And I love Jimmy's final line to close out the episode, where Kim asks what they do next, and he says, "We take the PPD and shove it up Chuck's ass." So it looks like there's going to be a fight. So we know for a fact that Jimmy doesn't get disbarred or lose his license because he is still practicing law in Breaking Bad times. In fact, I watched a discussion about this episode where the commenters seemed a bit confused about this point and thought maybe Jimmy didn't have his license in Breaking Bad. So it's still possible that he'll get disbarred, but the most certainly is not the case, as Saul Goodman was very clearly a practicing lawyer, so he very clearly still has his law license. So we know for a fact that Jimmy will not get disbarred. So the question is, how will he get out of it? And frankly, I'm a bit more concerned for Kim at this point, as I fear Jimmy may regret allowing her to help, as it's been made clear that Chuck isn't above hurting those who help Jimmy in order to get to Jimmy, as we see in this episode that Ernesto is fired simply for helping Jimmy out. And it's obvious that Chuck isn't simply going to, take this fight laying down, and he's going to be out for blood. And if he can't get to Jimmy, it seems he might go after Kim instead. So I am a bit concerned for her more than Jimmy, because unlike Jimmy, she wasn't in Breaking Bad, so her fate is entirely uncertain. However, it does make me wonder if they do go to trial, if they could simply use the fact that Chuck clearly instigated the incident and purposely set it up for Jimmy to incriminate himself. This could be easily proven by the simple fact that he had PIs there. But then that would require them to bring up the tape and the whole forgery incident, but the tape is inadmissible and easily defeated and was never really the point, so I think they could easily toss that aside. But again, I'm not too well versed in law, so maybe they won't go this way. Maybe they'll have another play. I don't know, I'll just have to see. In fact, I wouldn't be too shocked if this doesn't go to trial at all, as this show tends to, not have big courtroom cases and courtroom scenes and all that, and more of they resolve everything outside of court. But we'll see if that's the case here. Anyway, I am so excited to see what happens next. So my rating for Sunk Cost out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. It's mainly a cog in the machine that helps set up for future episodes, but it's a very good cog with impressive quality in cinematography, acting, and other filmmaking crafts that we've all come to love and expect from this show. And the story overall is very engaging and has me very excited to see what will happen next. So that's it for my review of Sunk Cost. Be sure to check back here every week as I cover every episode of Better Call Saul. Also be sure to check out my channel as I continue to do many more reviews on other shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Leftovers, The 100, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.